This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Hey, welcome to this week's show. We have a special treat for you. A gentleman that worked many, many years at my clubs. He's out of Ohio. You may recognize the name. He's had over 40 TV appearances. He's got a great 30-plus year career as a stand-up comic. But most importantly, he's a fantastic golfer. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeffery Jena. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
That's an amazing in-studio crowd you have there. I mean, I hope they're all...
It's amazing how many people I can fit in here. Hey, it's so great to hear your voice, wow. Jeff. We had a chance to work together a lot at the clubs. Your name came up recently. My wife and I are still avid golfers. In fact, sitting right in front of me is one of your old bumper stickers, so many courses, so little time.
So many courses, so little time.
And so your name came up, and I thought, man, this would be a great guy to have on the podcast because you're not only a terrific golfer, but one of the funniest guys. And you're still performing, I believe, or at least you're out there.
Yeah, well, right now I'm not performing too much.
Right.
I've been kind of retired a bit, but I still work when I can, and I have been active. I'm taking some time to do some other things now. One of the things I'm doing most right now is I did a special for Dry Bar Comedy, and I've been just promoting the heck out of that. Between my special and my clips from my special that are on YouTube and Facebook, I've got over 4 million views.
Hey, that's amazing. And
I mean, that's a lot of people. And like, I try to figure it out, like in the 40 plus years that I've done comedy clubs, on a good night, you have maybe 300 people, right?
Right.
And if you're really busy, you maybe do 200 shows a year, let's say. So that means in a good year, right, if you're doing 200 shows a year, 300 people a show, you perform to 60,000 people a year. So times 10 is 600,000. Times 4 for 40 years is 2.4 million people. So over 40 years, I've probably performed live for 2.4 million people, give or take a few.
Still a good number.
In less than a year, 4 million people have seen me on the internet.
It's amazing what technology has made available. I mean, even this podcast, we were talking about that if I'd written a book and got it out there, maybe a few hundred people would have picked up the book or something. But by doing this podcast, I'm reaching thousands of people, and we can share our history and comedy and make people laugh. But your 4 million hits for your video, and this is a great plug for Dry Bar Comedy. And you said it's on YouTube, and you can go to Dry Bar website.
You can go to drybarcomedy.com, and there's about 200 comedy specials on there. The name of mine, it's called Old Dog, New Jokes. Or you can just search my name too, Jeffery Jena, Jena, and it'll come up for you.
Oh, well, that's great. I'm glad that you found a way to take your talents and keep them going in these years later. Let's, as I talked about previously, I want to give the listening audience a little bit of a background. My show is based on kind of the history through my experience with comedy and entertainers through Laughs Unlimited. But let's go back a bit. How did you end up being a comic?
Well, I always say this in interviews. I always wanted to be a comic. When I was a kid, my dad had a great sense of humor. My dad had a great appreciation of comedians and loved to watch comedy on TV. And I can remember being a young boy and watching like the Ed Sullivan Show with my father. And he'd be laughing at the comedians. And one day I asked my dad, I said, what does that guy do? I knew what my dad did for a living. I said, what does that guy do for a living, Dad? And my dad goes, well, that's what he does, son. He goes on TV and he tells jokes. And I just remember thinking, wow, you can get paid money to tell jokes.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, isn't it?
And it just stuck with me as a kid. course, when you grow up, I grew up in a small town in Kentucky. It's not one of the options they present on career day.
I can believe that.
So I went to college and I studied to be a teacher, and I taught school for a few years. And I mean, teaching is a great profession. It's a noble profession. But I just wanted to try it at some point. I always wanted to try comedy. And when I was living down in Houston, Texas in the late 70s, teaching school in the public schools down there, one Sunday, I was looking through the Sunday paper, and maybe some of the millennials don't know that was a thing that was made out of paper
Exactly.
that they printed news in. I was looking through the Sunday paper, and there was an ad, a small ad that says, improv classes. Do you think you're funny? We give improv classes at the Comedy Workshop Theater in Houston, Texas. And I said, what the heck? And I went down and I signed up for a series of classes, and I found out that I was actually pretty good at it. And I started doing acting and improv acting. And then the owner of the club opened an adjoining comedy nightclub that had about 80 or 90 seats, called the Comics Annex. And he basically said, anybody interested in doing stand-up, write an act and go up. So
wow.
I had no idea. I mean, I had no clue of what I was doing.
What age
really.
were you? Because if you'd already been teaching, you're well in your 20s, right?
I was 27 or 28 already. So I was a little bit older.
For a guy that was interested in 8, 9, 10, that is a little bit of a delay, and you had a career going.
But I had. It had been like a fantasy, but never something I really pursued until I took that class when I was 27, 28 years old. So I said, I really want to be a stand-up. I want to try stand-up. So I put down a few ideas for jokes that I thought would work, and kind of rehearsed them in a mirror. Like people say, oh, you just rehearse in a mirror and get an idea, which is horrible advice, by the way. Because there's only one way to learn to be a stand-up comic.
It's to do it.
And that's to get on stage and try to be a stand-up comic.
Yeah, exactly.
The amazing thing, the thing that has always amazed me about comedy, it's the only art form that requires an audience. Like, my son's a musician, and you can sit in a room by yourself and play piano. And at some point, you can just go, wow, I'm getting pretty good at playing the piano. Right? Or you can paint pictures in a room by yourself and just at some point going, wow, I'm really getting good at painting. Or singing or dance or acting. But stand-up comedy, you may think you're good,
yeah.
but you don't know if you're good until you get in front of an audience. Stand-up comedy, doing comedy, is the only art form that requires a response from the audience to know if you're good.
That hasn't been said before, and that's so true.
And it's really odd. And I can remember it was like during the Carter administration, the first time I got up and did comedy, and I can remember one bit I thought was hilarious. I used to do a thing called the Billy Carter Reggae, which was like a parody reggae song being sung by Billy Carter, and I wish I could remember it, because it would show you how bad I was when I started.
Well, I would have thought that you'd been able to pull from your history. For example, Dennis Wolfberg was a teacher first, and a lot of his material came from those experiences with children and kids. And I'm sure that you, if you taught for a few years, must have had some material that the audience could relate to that falls back to being a teacher.
Oh, yeah, I had some stuff about teaching and, about I actually remember one bit I used to do. I used to say, I'm a math teacher. I'll go in and I'll teach for 2 or 3 months about percentages, interest rates, fractions. And at the end of the time, you think you're getting through the kids, and you ask a simple question like, okay, you put $10,000 in a bank for 1 year at 5.25%, which would show you how long ago it was. what do you get? And some could go, a toaster. So,
yeah, they weren't really absorbing everything you were trying to teach.
So, but I had some bits about teaching and about my family and things like that. But just, you know, and I know a lot of comics I've talked to over the years who agree with this. I don't know what it was after the first night of humiliation and embarrassment and being absolutely awful. I don't know what it was that made me want to go back and do it again.
You got bit by the bug, and it's interesting that even when we fail, that somehow the exhilaration and relating to strangers and getting any sort of response, even a boo, means somebody's listening to you.
Somebody's paying attention, exactly. So, and it wasn't until many, many, many years later, not only maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Outlier, which talks about people that become very good at things. And I know you and I have both heard this for many years in comedy. Well, it takes 10 years to become really good at comedy. That's true. And that's what Malcolm Gladwell says in his book, Outliers. It goes, it takes 10 years of repeated practice to be really good at anything. You know?
Right. And some people still don't achieve it. But if you work hard, and you're dedicated, and I think you have to have a personal interest and drive. In other words, I dealt with a lot of amateurs that would come in and say, oh, I heard this was an easy way to meet girls or an easy way to get money. And they weren't really interested in the art form. They just thought it was a quick path to show business or stardom. And it's so not true.
You know, I taught classes in stand-up comedy. And, you know, classes can't give you talent. Classes can't give you drive. Classes can't give you desire. But what a comedy class can do for you is show you how to avoid some of the pitfalls that we all make.
Right. Everybody makes mistakes.
Right. And it can give you, and I think that taking a class with somebody who really knows what they're doing might shorten that 10-year gap to maybe 8 years, you know, in becoming really good.
Well,
but I don't think you could take a class from somebody and become a world famous comedian or even a good comedian in 3 months or 2 months or whatever. But something I used to tell people in my classes was this, and it goes to what you were saying about people showing up because they think it's easy money or you get, you know, easy, you know, women like comedians or whatever. And this is what I would tell people is that you got to decide really early, or you're in it for life or the lifestyle, because it makes a difference. You know, if you're just in it for the lifestyle, hey, that's great, but you're not really an artist then.
Exactly.
You know, but if you're in it for life, and another thing I used to tell people is that if you want this to be your job, you have to treat it like a job.
Oh,
you have to go
that's
to work
really
every
important.
day.
Yeah.
And you have to be a professional when you're working, you know?
Oh, that's such great advice.
And you and I have both known many comedians, some fairly successful, who didn't take the job seriously. You know, it wasn't that they didn't treat it with respect, you know?
Well, I think that's a truism.
Totally straight off of your question about the comedy.
No, but still, and just to relate to that, back in the 80s, we did a lot of open mics, and I took it very seriously that I was trying to help young entertainers maybe find their way or decide it wasn't the right thing. And you probably don't remember, but my partner Bob and I wrote a book called Be a Stand-Up Comic or Just Look Like One.
I may have a copy of that book somewhere.
Well, what's interesting about the book is the first half of the book, we talk about all the nightmares of being a comic because we were trying to dissuade those that thought it was a lark. And then in the back half of the book, we thought, okay, you're still reading this. You must really be interested. Here's some tips to help you. And we interviewed several comics that we featured. Some of it was comedically, but some was true advice in the book. But it was funny because just like you're saying, we wrote the book for the same reason that you would teach those classes, is you're trying to weed out those that are there for a lark versus those that, hey, if they have true interest. In fact, there was several people I work with that really weren't that funny, but they had the drive, or they could write. And so all they needed was some of the lessons to focus their energies and their talents to make it work. And then there were other people that were kind of naturally funny on stage, but they didn't write, they didn't take it serious, they didn't work at it, and they went nowhere. Now, both of us have had some experience in that. How did we end up working together? Do you remember what got you to Laughs Unlimited?
I don't remember exactly. I'm trying to think back. I knew about Laughs, and I moved to California from Chicago in, I want to say, 86, maybe 1986. I think I moved out west, and as always, you move somewhere and you start looking for work. Networking, what's now called networking, with friends and that. I just kind of remember hearing about Laughs Unlimited, and people say, "Oh, this is a great club." And I think maybe it was my friend Tim Bador, who may have recommended me to you originally.
Yeah, Tim was one of the guys that got his start at Laughs. He was a radio DJ and started doing stand-up, ended up making a great career on it. In fact, one of my earlier podcasts is a great interview with Tim. But that's interesting that he introduced you, because I do remember it being in the latter part of the 80s. But you were a strong regular headliner through a lot of the 90s and worked my clubs quite a bit because you're very funny. And you didn't come in as an opening act. I think you came in maybe as a feature, but you were headlining right away.
No, I was headlining when I came there. I'm absolutely sure of that. But I'll tell you something else you might not remember. One of the reasons you and I kind of clicked was because I was very interested in animation. In fact, I still collect animation art.
Oh, cool.
And you had also written a book about animation art, I believe.
Right. We had the gallery. We'd written a book. And you know how we got into it? Bruce Baum.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Going back to the late 70s, early 80s. But it's interesting. Right. Yeah, I was really and still am involved in the animation world. But I didn't remember that you were interested, and you still collect. Good for you.
Right. And I had originally gotten interested in the early 80s. I was in New York City. There was an exhibit at the Whitney Museum in New York of Disney animators and animations. And that was in 81, I want to say. I had gone to see that exhibit, and I'd always been interested. I'd always liked cartoons and been interested in cartoons, and the exhibit just fascinated me for some reason. And I started collecting animation art back then. So, and in fact, I'm sitting in my family room now, and I probably have hung around the room about 35 or 40 different cells that are framed up.
My wife can relate. The house, we had the gallery for over 10 years, and then we finally had to shut it down when money got tight in the 90s. People quit buying art. But a lot of that animation, and of course my personal favorites, all ended up in our house. So our house is virtually a animation gallery. That's interesting. Right. You must have some great pieces.
I've got a few good ones. The one that I really like that I'll never give up is I have 2 cells from The Simpsons, which are first season from The Simpsons with the stamp, the studio stamp on the cell. And that was the only season where Matt Groening didn't control the cells.
Interesting.
And they're not available anymore. If you find a Simpsons cell, it's a first season cell that has the studio stamp on that. I can't remember whether it was MGM or Fox. Maybe it was Fox.
I think it was Fox. Yeah.
No, 20th Century Fox is who it was, and 20th Century Fox, they have that studio stamp on the cell as a authenticity signature.
Wow. That's cool. And Simpsons is such a classic and still going today. I mean, amazing history of animation. I'm lucky to have a image, a very large facial image of Bart, and he looks like he's coming through a hole or a window. And I have that cell, and I have it right over the toilet in the guest bathroom. So while people are doing their business, it looks like Bart's just staring at him with his grin, you know. But that's great. Oh, I'm glad that. So I did forget that. I apologize, but I bet we had many good conversation about that.
A lot of miles on the road since you and I have first met. So
yeah, and a few drinks under my belt.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. So
anyway,
you must have enjoyed our gallery, and hopefully you got a copy of the book. I remember
being in the gallery. It was kind of right around the corner, if I remember, in Old Sac. Kind of right around the corner from the club. I remember going in there, and I think you may have given me a copy. I know I have that book. I know I have that book. I might not have your stand-up comedy book. I think I do.
Yeah,
upstairs in my office library for those comedy stuff.
Right, those listening, it was called Cell Magic, and it was the art of collecting animation, and it was again, it was a effort of love for the art form, and we got a chance to tour the Disney archives, and we really had a lot of fun with that. Well, I'm glad that we had that to share.
You can help me with this. We're going off on all kind of tangents here. But there was a stand-up comedian, and gosh, I want to say her name was Karen, whose father was a Disney animator.
Oh, that is amazing. Good memory.
Yeah, but I don't know. Was Karen Anderson?
And maybe it was another Karen. I'll have to get somebody smarter than me to recall, but.
Because I remember and I think I worked with her once at Laugh, because I remember something sparked a conversation between us about animation. And that's why I think it was at Laugh, because we may have walked over to the animation gallery, and I said something to her about collecting. She goes, my father used to hand me cells from Cinderella and Snow White, and I used to cut them out. I used to cut out with my little scissors, cut out the figures. And I said, do you have any idea how much money
you cut up?
You know, like when you talk about putting baseball cards in your spokes as a kid.
Oh, right. You know, you don't have any clue at the time of the intrinsic value of something.
Of that, you put that Yogi Berra rookie card in your bicycle spokes.
And for those listening that don't understand, animation cells, which were the good ones, were hand painted and hand drawn, and they were a byproduct of a movie. And so the studios didn't give a rat's butt about them at the time. No. Now they're, valuable collectibles. So bringing it back down to comedy, you did work for Me and Laughs for many years. Did you have any particular memories of work in the club, or was there anybody in particular you worked with that you enjoyed?
I remember, and I'm going to bring up some painful memories maybe, but I remember your partner, who was a lovely woman, she had twin girls, I believe.
Yeah, Sue Henderson.
And Sue was the most wonderful, and she passed away, unfortunately, at a very young age.
Yeah, she was only 49. Yes, it was very sad.
And I have some. She was not that you and Joe weren't great. I don't want you to take that the wrong way.
No. I was the boss. I didn't have to be liked.
Right. But I remember how gracious and kind she was. Sue. And I remember we had a discussion, her and I, because she had cancer once and gotten through it. And my wife is a breast cancer survivor, and I remember talking to her about being a breast cancer survivor. And I think she had been in remission for 15 years, maybe more, when she got sick again.
It was really shocking, yes. And
it was very shocking and very sad. And I just remember, I especially remember, I don't remember like particular like sets or things like that. I remember more people. you know, and interactions I had with people and that kind of thing, you know, and just.
But that's really the important thing to take away from it. And you hit the right words in describing Sue. She was my better half in the business, and was my partner at that point in the into the 90s. Right. I had made her and her husband Fred partners, and we actually lost her within weeks of Jill and I getting married when she put our wedding together. Right. And it was a very dramatic time, and she was a very special woman. And thank you for bringing that up. In fact, one of the podcasts features an interview of her twin daughters, who are both very successful in their own right, but grew up in the club. And I interviewed them on what it was like growing up working for me and their mom and being, you know, like kids in this comedy atmosphere. It's a good listen if you guys want to check it.
They were like servers. They were like servers in the club, right?
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, servers and cooks, they did all kinds of things.
Well, you know, it's interesting, though. You bring up a good point, is that, of course, this podcast features on interviews and comedy sets and talking about the industry and the art form. But what makes it work, what's cohesive, is it's the relationships that we built. And just like talking with you, we haven't seen each other in over 20 years, and yet I feel like we saw each other on the golf course a week ago. I mean, you do.
It's strange how that happens, you know.
Yeah. Well, we went through a shared experience, something that we all cared about, and that's something that lasts. Now, you were a great headliner, and before I move on to, I have another topic to ask you about, but I got to tell you that I will never forget your bit about if I just made $5 more. You know, and
it's actually $40.
$40 more. Okay, $40 more.
Maybe it was inflation that drove it up.
But you talk about even if you won the lottery after this and after that, if I just had $40 more and
$40 more
because of your history,
I could pay my utility bill.
Yeah, as a history, your history as a math teacher, you utilized that and brought up interesting topics that the audience could relate to that involved money and math. And I think that was always almost your hook that worked with the audience very well. And I always remember it fondly.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, God. They're very, very nice.
And, so, and it's actually come up since. If I just had $40 more. Now, you've done a lot of stand-up. And I know that in your career, you had several television shots, as I alluded to in the opening. And I know you've worked a lot of cruise ships, and I'd love to hear your 2 cents on that. But before I get to that, did you or did you not actually manage the Improv in Irvine?
My son Miles, who's now 22 years old, was born in 1998, and when he was about to be born, I was doing really well as a comic on the road. I was headlining Improv and Funny Bones and other clubs around the country and making a pretty good nickel. But I just had this fear that if I continued just being a road comic, that someday I'd come home to a son who was 15 years old and had no idea who I was.
Well, road work is really a rough life.
And it's a very hard life. So I went to Robert Hartman, who, if you're really inside comedy, you know Robert.
Yeah, I do.
But he at the time owned a number of improvs and had taken over the improv chain from Bud Friedman and was a good friend. And it was one of those funny things. And Robert was just launching his agency and that, and I was thinking, I could be an agent. Because I know all the contacts and I know all the people to talk to, and so I could be an agent. And I was going to have a lunch with Robert and just ask him for a job. And so I call him, and he goes, "Hey, it's funny you should call, because I've been thinking about calling you." I said, "Oh, that's great." He goes, "I want to talk to you about something. Let's get together." So we go out, and it's like almost like the classic movie thing. "No, you go first. No, you go first." So Robert says to me, "Listen, we're moving the Irvine Improv, which was one of the flagship clubs of the Improv. We're moving the Irvine Improv from its old location, which was over by the campus of UC Irvine. So we're moving it over to this new thing they're building called the Irvine Spectrum, which is going to be this big entertainment and shopping complex. And he said, I don't want it to be like every other comedy club in the country where, you go to see the headliner and the other two acts are just kind of filling time and that kind of thing. He says, and I need somebody who's a good comic to be kind of the face of the club for me. And he said, would you be interested? And I said, wow, I'd be real interested because I am trying to get off the road because my son is on the way.
The timing was good.
The timing was perfect. So he said, well, if you did this job for me, how much would I have to pay you every week? And you know how it is. Like when you go into a negotiation on a job, there is that number,
Yeah, you have a number in the back of your mind, kind of a high and a low.
Right. All right. And so I'm thinking, man, I want to hit this number right here because he has a number in mind. And I don't want to be too far over the number or he won't like it. But I don't want to be too far under the number because then I won't make enough money. I'll leave money on the table. So I looked at him and I said, well, Robert, I said, I'll be getting money from you every week. So it's not like when I'm on the road that I have to make the same amount of money. So, and I throw out a number that I think is a little higher than he wants to pay. And he goes, really? Done. And in my mind, I go, there was more money there.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But it was a fair number. I mean, it was a fair salary. And so my job was basically this. I ran the show. I hosted the shows. I ran the showroom, and I kind of meted and greeted guests as they come in, and I got to know all the regulars in the room and everything. And through that, I got to meet a number of kind of name, quote unquote, comics who I didn't know before, and I kind of became friends with them. That gig there led to a number of TV appearances for me because producers and directors and casting directors came into the club to watch another comic, saw me do 10 or 15 minutes to open the show, and later approached me and said, hey, would you come on the show and do 5? So it was pretty nice. It was a pretty good gig.
Oh,
and
that's
I ended
great.
up doing that gig.
And it
I
lets
ended
you
up
be
doing
at home.
that gig for almost 5 years.
Wow. Congratulations.
As most things in life, things run their course. And so after about 5 years, I parted ways with the Irvine Improv with great memories and no regret.
Well, that's a great story. And the reason I brought it up, Jeff, is that you had my job at the Irvine Improv. And I've interviewed a lot of comics. I've interviewed a few ex-employees and stuff. But nobody has crossed that line between comic and producer. Even I think of myself strictly as a producer. Did you have any insights or reaction to being on both sides of the fence?
Yeah, the thing that being on the other side of the fence is you get an appreciation for, a comic. You might look at a room and think, well, there's 300 people here that pay $10 each. That's $3,000. I'm not getting my fair share of that money. When you're on the other side of the table, you realize that $3,000 not only has to cover the comics, but it has to cover the hotels and the rent and the insurance and the employees. And
you saw the business side of it.
Right.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And I was curious. I bet it made you a really good producer because you knew what it was like on the comic side.
Right.
And I bet after you left, it made you a better entertainer because you understood a little better about the business side. Because I do think that some entertainers that don't understand the money and the business side, might get an attitude or feel like you said, they're being taken advantage of, which is rarely the case. I mean,
right.
in my
what happened?
Okay.
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
No,
Just jump in. What
this
happened
is your
was,
interview.
Later on, after I had left the Improv as an employee, Robert contacted me about. He said, "Hey, you wouldn't be interested in investing in the club, would you?" And I had planned to move back east to near where I grew up, and the club he was talking about was kind of near where I was moving to. And I said, you know, I talked about how much was involved and how much money I had to put in. Anyway, that was 14, 15 years ago, and I invested a relatively small amount of money, and I have done very well on that investment. So I knew the potential that a well-run club could provide for an income, and invested in a club with Robert, and have done very well on that investment over the 15 years I've had that investment. So,
oh, congratulations! Were you a silent partner, or did you get involved?
Yeah. I'm very quiet. I just say thank you when they send the check.
Well, that's interesting. I had the opportunity to get involved in other people's comedy clubs or chains, and I was really enjoying my life at Laughs and didn't want to mess it up, and so I passed. And so there's a few occasions that are pretty famous where I helped people get into the business that ended up making much more money and much more successful than I was. But I was really happy with what I was doing, and I think that's because I was never in it for the money. I was just loving the whole thing. Well, that's interesting, and I'm thank you for sharing that, because that is a different perspective. And interacting with the comics. Now, when you did interact with the comics and you were negotiating prices and stuff, did it give you a little bit of an edge having been on the road?
Yeah, and I'll tell you a quick little story. I won't mention names, but I'm at the club one week, and we have a headliner in the club. Now, keep in mind, the guy only lives in L.A., which is a 40-minute drive away. So, but he's staying in a hotel, a very nice hotel. And every 25 to 30 minutes, I get a call. Hey, how do I get to the club? I'll send somebody to pick you up. Don't worry. Then, 30 minutes, say, hey, how do I get something to eat? And finally, after about the fourth phone call, I just stopped and I said, hey, man, let me ask you a question. When you're at your home 40 minutes away from here, who wipes your ass there?
That's a great response.
And it was, and fortunately, I had a relationship with this person as a comedian before that. And he kind of got the message,
Yeah, he was being...
And the other advantage, I'll just tell you one more thing, too. The other advantage that I had as a showroom manager in that was that I had a relationship with a lot of comics. And somebody like a comic who I won't mention to get a name, but somebody would be coming in like next week, and all the people on set like, oh, that guy's such a pain in the behind. Oh, that guy's so hard to get along with. Oh, that guy's such a, And I said, really? And so he would come, and when he saw I was the person there in charge, the whole attitude was just, I'm working for a friend.
Oh. Oh, that's such an advantage.
And so at the end of the week, the staff would go, wow, he wasn't like that at all last time. He was this and he was that. And I said, well, I guess, it just, and one of the things is a lot of times, and this is true, a lot of times guys who are artists, they'll push you to see what they can get away with.
Oh, of course. It's a business.
And when you draw a line, you say, listen, that's not going to happen. And if you don't like that, then you can just go, because I can get another comic.
Yeah, and that's so true. And it's important that you understood that you had that power.
Right. And I knew that Robert would back my play. And I had another incident, and again, I won't mention the comic's name, but we had them at a very nice hotel in a suite, and they called up and said, this hotel is totally unsatisfactory for the manager was calling me. The comic didn't call me themselves. And the manager called me and said, that hotel's totally unsatisfactory.
Oh, jeez.
And I said, well, listen, that's the hotel. I don't know what to tell you. And the manager goes to me, well, my client is probably going to walk on the gig. And I stopped and I said, how many weeks does and this guy, this person was making a lot of money,
Mm-hmm.
as a name headline act. And I said, how many weeks does your client have at improv? And he goes, well, what's that to you? I said, well, because you're not only walking on this week at Irvine, you're going to be walking on all these weeks, because I'm going to hang up. I'm going to tell Robert about our conversation, and I'm going to tell him how you talk to me, and he's going to cancel all your weeks. And the guy hangs up on me.
Ooh.
So I call Robert and I said, here's the deal. And he goes, I got your back. So the manager calls Robert. A few minutes later, the manager calls me back and goes, hey, listen, we'll be at the club on time tonight. And
got to his purse strings.
And the whole week was very smooth after that. So,
yeah. Wow. That's a great story. I'm not afraid to name names. I don't know if you've ever actually fired a comic midweek, but I had the pleasure, two guys that ended up having really good careers. One very famous, Bill Maher, and then Bill Kirkenbauer. The two Bills were the only comics in my 20 plus years of managing the club that I fired midweek just because of attitude and problems. And never regretted it. In fact, I still talk about it because I think guys with that kind of attitude and think their shit don't stink doesn't carry with me as a club owner. It was all about being funny in the audiences. And actually, in both those cases, what really offended me was that they were telling my audiences who paid to see them how stupid they were. And it's like, who the hell are you to do that? I mean, nobody's that good. So that's interesting and great stories. And that's the kind of stuff that you would run into on the business side. And then on the comedy side, you were fairly unaware of, especially if you were a good, easy to work with comic like you were. Now, I know in the years since, you've had a lot of success. We mentioned over 40 appearances on TV like MTV, Showtime, HBO, and you've done a lot of cruises. How many years were you on the seas?
Oh, well, I started doing doing cruises when I was living in Los Angeles, and I would do them just to kind of fill in my schedule. I got an open week. I can go down and do this weekend cruise out of Long Beach, pick up some money. Yeah, okay, I'll do it. And I was working in Vegas a lot back in the middle 90s and that, and I didn't do a lot. But when I decided to move away from California and move back to the Midwest, I was already beginning to kind of age out of nightclubs, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah. No, it's definitely harder once you get older.
And I'm not like a huge name. I'm not a big star. So the demand for me to appear in nightclubs was kind of falling off. And so I had worked for an agency out of Florida, Don Casino Agency, and Wendy, who was Wendy Casino, but she's now married and is now Wendy Garvis. And I called Wendy, and I hadn't worked for her in 7 or 8 years. And I called her up in 2005 or 6, I want to say. And I just said to her, I said, hey, this is Jeff Jena, and I don't know if you'll remember me. And she goes, Jeff Jena, what are you doing? And so she goes, it's great to hear from you. How are you? And so we talked for, 10 or 15 minutes about totally everything not business.
Right.
And just like you said earlier, it's like you have a relationship with somebody in this business and you don't talk to them for a number of years. Well, you start talking, all of a sudden it's like, didn't I just see you last week?
Yeah.
And so after about 15 minutes, I kind of stopped and I said, Wendy, I guess it's really no secret why I'm calling you. I'm really hurting for some work right now. And without hesitation, she said, how many weeks can I give you?
Wow. See, she had the memory of your act that I have.
Right. And so Wendy was very, very nice to me. She helped me start getting work on ships. And so I've been working ships pretty regularly since 2005. So for about 15 years now, I've been doing a lot of cruise work. Still do a lot of corporate stuff.
Well, you're perfect for corporate and cruises because I didn't mention this earlier in the podcast, but and there's a difference out there. You're a clean comic, the kind that I appreciated, especially as a club owner, that I could bring in as a headliner. I have no problem with dirty comics or comics that drop the F-bomb when it's got a reason. Right. But there's a handful of people, especially from our generation, and a lot of them are famous, and a lot of them, and you fall in that category that was very funny, clean, very successful, just not famous. And I hope I'm not taking anything away, but that's the reality of the business. It's like there's hundreds of really good actors, but we can only name 10 or 20, right?
Right. But here's the thing, Scott, is like people talk about success all the time. It's like, to me, I'm very successful because for 40 years, I've done exactly what I wanted to do with my life, both on and off stage. My career on stage has given me financially enough money to do what I want to do when I'm not on stage.
That's really a blessing. How many people can say that?
And it's like, and I tell people this, I haven't worked a day in 40 years.
That's great. Yeah, it's true.
I've had jobs, but it's not work to me.
Yeah.
And I was one of those people who had real jobs, like teaching. I worked in a steel mill. I worked in another factory that made bathroom cabinets. I've had real jobs. And real jobs can be soul-sucking, But if you have a job that you love going to and it's something you want to do, that's a blessing beyond compare in life. So,
exactly. And you said that very well, and it's so true.
I've been very, very fortunate in that sense. So, like, I've had a very, very successful career. Now, I didn't get everything I wanted out of it. I'm not so rich that I can just, burn $100 bills, but I've done well.
I think you stipulated
good to me.
What was important to you and why you feel successful, and I totally agree. I kind of went the other way. I had a lot of fun when I was young, and I've had more of the real jobs since, which has not been my life dream. But through this podcast and I still do charitable fundraisers, and I get on committees to help produce shows, and that's kept me my toe in the creative world, and I'm envious of someone like you that's been able to keep that going all these years. And let's take it on to the next subject. One of the great benefits of being a successful road comic and entertainer like you is that we have the time and money for our joyous times, and for you and me, but mostly you, it's on a golf course. In fact, I believe your wife is a golf pro.
No, she was at one time. She's been retired from that for a number of years.
But she plays. I mean, how cool is it to be able to play with I get the joy of playing with Jill all the time, so I imagine you guys get out and hit the links and still have fun.
Well, we actually played in a tournament together this weekend, so
how
it was
cool.
pretty good.
Oh.
Yeah. So we had a great time Saturday and Sunday playing and having a great time. So, yeah.
How's your game, sir?
I mean, golf is, you know what? Not bad.
Good.
Not bad at all. I'm blessed in another way physically. I'm 68 years old now. Physically, thank God, I haven't had any major health problems in my life. I still walk great. My balance is good. My memory is great.
All this is important for a good golf game.
Yeah, and I exercise all the time, and I've been very fortunate to not have a lot of physical problems. And so, I can still hit the ball pretty good, and I still love being out there. It's like I told a friend today we played today. It was just an absolutely gorgeous day today, and I said, you know what? You wake up in the morning, you get to hang out with people you like. You get to do something you love in this unbelievably beautiful place with this absolutely perfect weather. If you play well, that's like a bonus.
Right.
That's just the bonus. That's just the icing on the cake,
Well, you've been doubly blessed because you were able to make a living doing what you loved, and when you got the chance to play, you got to do golf in it because of your travels. I bet you've played courses from coast to coast.
Oh, I've been not only that, but I think I counted up once how many different countries I had played golf in.
Oh, in different countries. Interesting.
And, like Canada, Mexico, then played golf in Jamaica, in England, in Scotland,
I'm so
in
jealous.
Ireland, so in Australia. So I think I've played golf in 12 or 13 different countries, which is a whole nother, blessing.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to have another podcast just about golf. I think that's great.
You know who? I'll throw in a name just real quick as long as we're on golf. You know who has my dream job of now? I don't know if you ever worked with David Wood.
Yeah, I know David.
Who was not the was there a ventriloquist named David Wood?
Dave Wood was a ventriloquist, right?
But there was a David Wood who was a stand-up.
Mm-hmm.
And he now has a job where he travels all over the world and plays golf courses. And then he works for one of the golf magazines or a golf website.
No, and he just
writes
them?
about.
Oh.
He writes about the courses and rates them. And then he leads trips to Scotland, let's say. They'll organize a trip of, 50 or 100 golfers who are going to go to Scotland for a week. And he goes along and he's like the kind of the host of the trip.
Oh, that is it.
So he's living my dream life right now.
Yeah. See, it's funny, as good as your life has been, it's easy to find somebody that has something you can envy, that, especially as a talented golfer like you, to be able to see somebody making a living doing what he loves, getting paid for it. I mean, damn, that's great.
And I see his posts on Facebook all the time, and I always like them, and I always leave him a little note. Man, you're living large, man. You're living the dream. So.
Oh, that's great. Well, let's bring it back down to comedy, Jeff. What I want to do is I'm going to share some material, tape live of you doing your sets. As I mentioned a couple times, you're one of the top headliners that we had through the club. Always clean, always funny. I never remember having any issues working with you. It was always a pleasure. And thank you so much for saying some kind words about Sue, and really appreciate it.
And, I'm sure you don't want a big pat on the back, but you and Jill were always great to me, too. And I always, I can remember going out and playing golf with you and Jill, and I think maybe we drove into an Oakland A's baseball game once or twice together. And just, those are the things that I remember more than, particular shows or anything like that.
Well, like I said in the beginning, it's the relationship we built that we're able to continue today. Thank you so much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so happy to share with you some of the comedy of this very funny man, Jeffery Jena. If you get a chance, check him out on Dry Bar Comedy. Is it drybarcomedy.com? Is it that simple?
Yeah. Yeah, you can go to drybarcomedy.com and just search my name, Jeffery Jena, or Old Dog, New Jokes, and you can watch the special. You can also find clips on Facebook or YouTube if you just search my name.
Oh, well, that's great, but let's not make him search. I'm going to play some of your great material right now. Jeff, thanks so much for spending some time with me tonight, and appreciate you doing the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, sit back. We're going to hear some great live comedy. Thank you, Jeff. Hope you enjoyed doing this.
Scott, it was great to talk to you. My best to Jill, and take care of yourself.
Ladies and gentlemen, here's some great stand-up comedy by Jeffery Jena.
I'm a dad. I have one son. My son's name is Miles. If I mention him later in the show, Miles is my son. Unless I'm in Canada, then he's kilometers. Younger people, help the older people. They don't get the metric system. Look at them. They're confused. He is a great boy. He is our only child. So as you can imagine, he is the crown prince at our house. And he just turned 19. I love that reaction. Huh? So let me answer the question in every woman in the room's mind right now. 66. See, because I know when I say I got a 19-year-old son, every woman in her mind goes, well, how the heck old are you, Grandpa? That's not right. He's got a 19-year-old and an ARP card. Older people, help the younger people with that joke. That's a good joke. He's a great boy. He just turned 19. I was in charge of the birthday party this year. Here's what we did. We had some cake and ice cream. We gave him the presents, and it was over! Over! Dads, when your children, when they turned 1, did you guys have a birthday party for them? Of course, of course. And that was your idea, Dad? Of course not. When Miles turned 1, my wife and I got in a huge argument about the birthday party and stuff. Like, she's yelling at me across the house. It's important that we have his friends over. I'm like, baby, he's 1. He doesn't know his own friends. I'm out of the house for 3 hours. He don't know me when I come back in. Now, I don't have to tell any dad in the house tonight who won this argument, do I, dads? We ended up spending $1,800. Oh, I see the look, young millennial man. Let me explain this. It's kind of like some kind of government project. There were cost overruns and union problems. We spent $1,800 on a birthday party for a 1-year-old. See, I thought my idea was much better. This is my idea. I said, we take him to the county fair, put him on a pony, have his picture taken. I take the picture home, I throw it into a drawer, and I wait. I wait 5, 8, 15 years from now, he will find that picture, and he will come to me, his father, and he'll go, Daddy, what was this? I'll say, son, that was your first birthday? When I bought you a pony. We used to ride him all around the neighborhood. Then one day I had to go out of town. Your mom didn't take care of him and he died. I know you don't remember that, do you? No. Too young.
Hey, that was a great comedy set by Jeffery Jena. I know you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for listening to the show. We'll see you next week. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.